I finished my previous video with the Russians preparing for their second push, after their first push has been culminated with significant successes. The last event I was talking about are the Ukrainian counterattacks near Alexifka and Bahhatier, trying to mess up the Russian schedule. But the Russians didn't let the Ukrainians take over the initiative with some small-scale attacks. They utilized their recent gains, put the finishing touches to their plans, and launched their second main push. In the central main direction of attack, the Russians realized that after the Ukrainians eliminated their advance towards Alexeyevka, they have to shift their center of gravity. This green line represents a rough estimate of the area of influence of this attack. Perfectly at its southern flank lies the small village of Frasiv. This village is also in ideal position to threaten the right flank of the Ukrainians defending and the western perimeter of Constantinople. This is why the Russians attacked here right after the aforementioned Ukrainian counterattack. I assume that the Russians also made good use of the presence of their operational level command system, since this operation was a coordinated effort of the 36th Motorized Rifle Brigade and the 430th Motorized Rifle Regiment. The 36th launched an assault company from the south as a shaping operation, and they captured some farmlands southeast of Razliv. In perfect coordination with this, right when this shaping operation reached its climax, the Russians launched their main attack. They sent a company worth of motorcyclists and rode into the village, some kind of a Russian Sons of Anarchy. The next week brought insane battles in and around Razliv. The Ukrainian 37th Marines, albeit could not stop the initial Russian assault, they committed all their resources to isolate the Russians in the village and subsequently destroy them. During this more than a week, both warring parties launched drones after drones, employed artillery, but by the 8th of April the Russians managed to solidify their positions in and around the village. Parallel with the first days of the battle for Razliv, the Russians launched an attack against the defenses of the battle-worn Ukrainian 72nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade. They exploited their already existing bulges near Katlarifka and Preobrazhenka, but here they chose not to attack on motorcycles but in a more classical fashion, attack with armored vehicles. I assume that this latter has some strong connection with the fact that in this sector the Russian 90th Guards Tank Division was responsible for the operations. About this operation I already made a video, so I will not repeat myself, but of course if you are interested I put the link into the description. What is necessary to know that by the end of the 27th of March, some Russian armored vehicles reached almost 4 kilometers deep behind the Ukrainian lines, but here they were attacked and destroyed by Ukrainian drone units. But this operation indeed gained some ground, but what is more important, it made crystal clear that in some sectors of the Ukrainian defenses there are huge gaps because of the lack of infantry. But it also made clear that attacking with armored vehicles is worse idea than attacking on motorbikes, mainly if the defenders' artillery have been effectively suppressed. The Russians stick to their schedule and their methods and launched another assault, now in the center. On the 3rd of April, they sent a mechanized infantry company of the 656th Motorized Rifle Regiment against Alexeyevka. Here the results were even worse than in the north 5 days before. With the concentrated effort of drones, drone drop mines and artillery, the whole company have been destroyed well before they could reach their assault objective. Albeit, this company had been destroyed, but some assault troopers or elements of subsequent infantry attacks managed to penetrate some Ukrainian forward positions in the area, about which I found an evidence provided by the Ukrainian 46th Air Assault Brigade. In this video, from which I present you this screen grab, one Ukrainian soldier throws a modified mine as a grenade on the Russians hiding in the recently occupied trench. This is clearly an element of a mop-up operation some hours after the aforementioned failed Russian attack, but I would like to draw your attention to one important thing. These used to be Ukrainian trenches are not ready. They do have some dugouts and covered positions, but they completely lack any kind of overhead cover and camouflage. In this state, these trenches are not usable for effective defensive combat, quite the contrary, they are death traps to the troops fighting in them. But this poor stance of Ukrainian defenses raises another question. The area of Andreevka is a scene of heavy battles for at least 6 months from now. Why on earth the Ukrainians could not build adequate field fortifications here? If I would be the commander here, I would pose some uncomfortable questions for the engineering troops or civilian contractor responsible for this. By the end of the first week of April, the Russians' second main push have been culminated. During this operation, their biggest success was the capture and hold of the village of Frasiv. In the center, they failed to advance and they lost a company in the process. In the north, they managed to advance halfway to their objective. I would say that the second Russian push was a tie. Quite surprisingly, the Russians did not launch any major offensive attempts in the southern flank, except one tactical success towards Viesela, but they carried out extensive fire preparations by drones and artillery. After the second push, the Russians, just as always, took their time to plan and prepare. In the first week of April, only the aforementioned artillery preparations and the battle for Razliv were going on. After almost a week, the Russians were ready to continue their operational level offensive. On the 8th of April, the Russians, after heavy preparatory fires, sent an infantry assault group from Razliv towards northwest and reached the N15 highway. With this success, the Russians effectively cut all logistic ties of Ukrainian subunits fighting west of Constantinople. The coming 3 days brought intensive battles in the area south from the town of Bahhatier. The Ukrainians counterattacked the Russian spike in their flank, but the Russians held firmly. This success was made possible by the effective supporting attacks by two already battle-proven Russian units, the 5th Tatsinskaya Separate Guard Tank Brigade and the 37th Budapestskaya Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade carried out attacks in the next 72 hours and step by step they managed to advance significantly in the farmlands south of Bahhatier. While these events were going on south of Bahhatier, the Russians were also active in the north. On the 15th of April, after a long series of infantry assaults, they managed to capture the area which they failed to do 2 weeks before with the ill-fated armored assault attempt. On the 16th of April, the 90th Guards Tank Division shifted its center of gravity and attacked near Srivne and managed to advance to the next tree line. The 17th brought another Russian success in the center. They managed to advance closer to Bahhatier through a wide front. On the 18th of April, the Ukrainians realized the dangerous situation north of Andreevka. The 35th Marines Brigade and the 158th Battalion of the 180th Territorial Defense Brigade, temporarily subordinate to the 35th Marines, executed a tactical withdrawal from their exposed positions, and by the end of the day the Russians took over them. By the middle of April, from around the 20th, the Russians seemingly ceased their attacks once more and they concentrated on preparatory fires. Multiple heavy Uragan MLRS strikes had been carried out against the defenders of Alexifka, and in the same time the warring parties constantly harassed each other with drone strikes on logistics and troop rotations. The Russian tactical aviation was also active. Despite of effective Ukrainian GPS jamming, on the 1st of May, the Russians celebrated the Day of Workers by executing 37 airstrikes on the town of Bahhatier. It seems that the Russians decided not to execute larger efforts with huge resources achieving smaller results. But instead of this, they opted for a constant creeping advance. I would say don't push, just creep. On the 3rd of May, the Russian 114th Motorized Rifle Brigade and the 88th Motorized Rifle Regiment managed to advance a bit in the steppe north of Andreevka. On the 5th of May, after more than a month, the Russians managed to capture the small village of Katlarifka. They achieved this with a classic tactical operation. They sent an assault group to attack from the front and fix the defenders, and in close coordination with this, they enveloped the Ukrainians from the left. In the same time, the Russians managed to advance up to the perimeter of Bahhatier. They attacked by motorcycle assault units, and however the Ukrainians hit a lot of them, it seems that the Russians managed to suppress the Ukrainian artillery enough, because the bulk of the riders reached the perimeter of the town. Meanwhile, exactly according to their methods, The Russians attacked along the perimeter of the area of influence of their previous attack at Katlarifka. On the 6th of May, they launched a successful infantry attack on Troitske and advanced to the perimeter of the village called Harihove west of Troitske. The Russians did not stop here. On the next day, the 7th of May, they thought that the weather is nice, why not to ride a bike? So they launched all-out motorcycle assaults. On the 7th, they sent a platoon of bikers against Bahhatier, and on the 8th they attacked towards Alexifka with the same procedures. Both failed spectacularly, which is a clear evidence that if the defenders' artillery and drones are not suppressed adequately, these motorcycle assaults suffer tragic losses. However, these losses were not tragic in the strategic Russian perspective. 2 platoons are nothing in a war like this. The 37th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade continued employing the infantry assault group method, which yielded success. On the 10th of May, they broke into the town of Bahhatier and captured 40% of it. On the next day, the Russians, thanks to their adequately structured command system, shifted their center of gravity in the operational level. They deployed 2 assault companies of the 88th Motorized Rifle Regiment and advanced 4 kilometers deep and 3 kilometers wide, which is a significant gain in this war. The town of Bahhatier became the center of Russian efforts by mid-May. Mainly the Russian 36th and 37th Motorized Rifle Brigades carry out operations here. The Russians attacked every day since the 11th. According to scarcely available sources at the data cutoff day of this video, which is the 19th of May, the Russians advanced up to the northern part of the town on the 14th or the 15th, but by the end of the 15th the Ukrainians pushed them back. On the 17th of May, the Russians deployed another assault company and they even raised some battle flags, actually 9 of them altogether, in the town. But the Ukrainians managed to organize a proper counterattack. After short but intensive artillery, but mainly drone strikes, they launched a powerful counterattack and pushed the Russians out from the town. In the next days, both warring parties claimed complete control of the town and in the same time falsified their enemies' claims. So I would say that Bahhatier is heavily contested at the time of recording this video. Well, it is quite difficult to provide a proper summary, hence the Russian offensive is still going on. But I think it is useful to summarize the events happened so far, analyze them, discover patterns, and based on them, try to predict the future. As I examined the Russian operations in the last 2.5 months in this sector, I realized the following. The Russians indeed tried to advance along their 2 main directions and 1 supporting direction of attack. However, when they realized that their flanks are exposed, they stopped their breakthrough attempt and concentrated on securing their flanks. Now the fierce battle for Bahhatier is going on. This small town has an enormous tactical significance. I dare to say it even has an operational significance. Because this tiny settlement is in the path of the central direction of attack, and in the same time its left flank can also be covered if captured. That is why this settlement changed hands at least 3 times in 5 days. Based on all of this, my prediction would be that the Russians, sooner or later, will capture this town, I would say by the very end of May. This fact will help them to attack against Alexifka, which can fall by the end of June. Parallel with these operations, the Russians can attack near Vesele towards the village of Kamar. These successes will force the Russians to secure their flanks, so I anticipate attacks in these 2 designated areas. Defending against this method is easy and difficult in the same time. The Ukrainians can precisely calculate the Russian schedule, but they would need accurate information from drones and other sensors to precisely anticipate exactly when the Russians will shift their center of gravity from their main effort to their flank. And of course, these predictions can only be true if the circumstances don't change, but they always do. Well, that is all that I wanted to say. If you think my job worth it, please give this video a like or subscribe to my channel. If you have anything to add, I am more than happy to see it in the comments. Thank you and see you soon.